I had everything: a brilliant career, a beautiful home, and the perfect woman. Our 5 years together were a golden dream, a prelude to the family we would build. I'd even bought the ring, a sparkling promise of forever. But a week before I could propose, a phone call shattered my world. She was in the ICU, broken and clinging to life. After a week of desperate prayers at her bedside, I returned home, hollowed out by grief. The next morning, I opened my front door to a miracle. There she stood, healed and more beautiful than ever. She was home. She was safe. But as I reached out to hold her, she glided past me without a word, straight to our bed, and buried herself under the covers. It was only when her mother's frantic phone call pierced the silence, and I turned back to the bedroom, that I understood the true nature of the horror. The bed that had held her was now perfectly, impossibly flat. My miracle was not a blessing. It was a visitation. My world was built on a foundation of logic. As a structural engineer, I found a profound comfort in the predictability of physics, in the certainty that for every action, there was an equal and opposite reaction. My life before Alara was a meticulously drafted blueprint: clean lines, optimal stress distribution, and a quiet, echoing emptiness. Then she walked into a corporate mixer, a splash of vibrant watercolor on my monochrome schematic. Her name was Alara Valdez, and she was from the marketing department, a world of intuition and emotion I had always dismissed as chaotic. But her chaos was beautiful. Her eyes, the color of sea glass, held a light that seemed to soften the hard edges of the room. Our first conversation was a comical clash of lexicons. I talked about load-bearing capacities and tensile strength, and she described the architecture of the sunset bleeding over the city skyline. We were speaking different languages, yet for the first time, I felt truly understood. She dismantled my ordered world, piece by piece, and rebuilt it into something glorious and unpredictable. She moved into my sterile apartment, and with her came the scent of jasmine and oil paint, the sound of her laughter, and her canvases that turned bare walls into windows to her soul. My life was no longer a solitary equation. It was a complex, beautiful, and shared algorithm. My career flourished. The bridges I designed were no longer just feats of engineering, but elegant curves against the sky, inspired by the graceful line of her neck. The money became an afterthought, a tool to build a world worthy of her. I bought the house on the cliff, a glass and steel structure that was my profession's masterpiece, but its soul was entirely Alara. We would spend hours on the deck, wrapped in a single blanket, watching the Pacific Ocean's endless, churning drama. It was there, with the salt wind in her hair, that we began to speak of children. I could see it all, a future so bright it was blinding, and it all hinged on a single, perfect circle of carbon and metal. The quest for the ring became my secret obsession. I visited jeweler after jeweler, my engineer's mind trying to quantify the unquantifiable. I needed a stone that didn't just meet a grading report, but one that captured her essence. I found it in a dusty shop run by an old man named Silas. He didn't show me a tray, he brought out a single box. The solitaire diamond was 3 carats, set in platinum, but it was the light within it, a captured lightning storm that threw rainbows around the dusty room. Its gleam was hers. It was 100% her. I purchased it without a second thought. For 2 weeks, the hidden ring was a secret sun burning in my desk drawer, its promise humming in my veins every time I looked at her. Our 5th anniversary was a week away. The future was a solved equation, and the answer was a resounding, joyful yes. The phone call came a week before the anniversary. I was immersed in the calming logic of a stress analysis report, a world where numbers behaved and materials obeyed known laws. The unknown number on my screen was an irrational variable, an annoyance. Donovan Hayes, a woman's voice, flat and professional. Yes, there's been a multi-vehicle accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. Alara Valdez was involved. She's in the ICU at St. Jude's. You're her emergency contact. The words were a seismic event, a force that shattered the foundational laws of my personal universe. The phone clattered to the floor. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. My body operated on a primal, screaming directive, bypassing all conscious thought. The world outside the car was a smear of color and threat, traffic laws rendered meaningless. The ICU was a habitat of hushed dread. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and despair. I bypassed the waiting room, my voice a ragged, demanding thing. Alara Valdez. Where is she? Room 407. Pushing that door open was like crossing into an alternate dimension, a nightmare version of my reality. The vibrant woman I loved was a broken doll in a sterile white bed. Her face, the map of my happiness, was a grotesque palette of purple bruises and angry, stitched cuts. Tubes snaked from her arms and nose, one carrying her dark blood out, another pumping clear medicine in. A plastic tube was taped to her mouth, connected to a ventilator that hissed and clicked with a rhythm that was all wrong. It was breathing for her. Her mother, Eleanor, was a shattered statue in a chair, her face ravaged. The sight broke the last of my composure. My legs gave way and I fell to my knees, grasping Alara's limp, cool hand. Please, I begged, my voice a broken whisper that escalated into a raw sob. I was a man of science, but in that moment, I bargained with any entity that would listen. God, please, don't take her. Show mercy. I'll do anything. I became a permanent fixture of room 407. I slept in a vinyl chair, my neck permanently cricked. I talked to her for hours, my voice a steady stream against the relentless beeping of the monitors. I recounted our memories, described our future, my words a lifeline I threw into the silent, beeping abyss of her coma. The doctor's updates were a slurry of jargon, traumatic brain injury, internal bleeding, induced coma, each term a nail in the coffin of my hope. After 7 days, hollowed out and ghost-like, I let Eleanor convince me to go home, to shower, to sleep. The drive was a blur. The house was a tomb, filled with the artifacts of a life that felt already lost. I awoke to gray dawn light, the fading scent of jasmine on her pillow a cruel mockery. The memory of the last week crashed down, a weight that made getting out of bed a Herculean effort. I moved like an automaton, brushed teeth, get dressed. My only purpose was to return to the hospital, to resume my vigil. I was a planet in a decaying orbit around her fading star. I grabbed my wallet and keys, pulled open the heavy front door, and braced for the day's grim reality. And there she was, Alara, standing on the welcome mat, as if she'd just returned from a walk on the beach. My mind short-circuited. It could not compute the data my eyes were providing. She was perfect. The bruises, the cuts, the swelling, all gone. Her skin was flawless, glowing with a health that was almost unnerving. She wore the same yellow sundress from the day of the accident, but it was pristine. Her auburn hair was clean and vibrant. And her smile, it was her smile, but intensified, a beacon of pure joy that seemed to warm the very air around her. It reignited my soul. A sob of relief racked my body. Alara, I choked out, tears streaming. My God, you're okay. You're home. I surged forward to crush her in an embrace, to feel the living truth of her. But as I moved, she took a subtle, fluid step backward. It wasn't a jerk of surprise. It was a smooth, effortless motion, as if the space between us had simply expanded. My arms closed on empty air. A flicker of confusion was smothered by overwhelming joy. She must be in shock. She must be exhausted. Without a word, she stepped past me and into the house. Her movement was different, smoother, more silent. She glided rather than walked, her feet making no sound on the hardwood. She moved with unwavering purpose, straight down the hall to our bedroom. I followed, my heart a wild drum of relief. She went directly to the bed, lay down, and pulled the duvet up to her chin, turning away from the door. Of course. She was exhausted. She needed the peace of her own bed. "Sleep well, my love," I whispered, flicking off the light and closing the door, leaving it open a crack. For the next 4 hours, the house felt alive again. The nightmare was over. Blissful delirium filled the following hours. I made coffee, the rich aroma a welcome normality. I tidied the living room, a smile permanently etched on my face. The world had been restored. And with that restoration came a new, urgent resolve. I had nearly lost her without asking the most important question. I would not risk that uncertainty for another second. I went to my office and unlocked the desk drawer. The black ring box felt electric in my hand, a contained star of promise. I slipped it into my pocket and walked back to the bedroom. The room was dim and preternaturally still. She was a motionless mound under the covers. The silence was so profound it seemed to absorb sound. "Sweetie," I called softly. "Are you awake?" No response. Not a shift, not a sigh. I took a step closer. "Alara, did you not tell your mother you were released?" "She's devastated." I reached out my hand to gently touch her shoulder. My phone erupted in a shrill ring, shattering the silence. I jumped back, my heart lurching. "Eleanor." Annoyed, I retreated into the hallway. "Eleanor, you won't believe it. She's here. She's home." The sound that came through the speaker was a guttural, soul-shattering wail. "She's gone, Donovan. My baby is gone. She passed away 20 minutes ago. The machines, she's gone." A cold spike of denial pierced me. "No, you're mistaken. She's here in our bed." My insistence amplified her agony. "I'm so sorry. She loved you. I have to go." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the dial tone droning in my ear. A mistake. A cruel, administrative error. It was the only explanation. Completely dumbstruck, I turned and pushed the bedroom door open. "Sweetie, did you not tell your mother that I cut myself off? My mouth hung agape. My blood flash froze. The bed was perfectly, unnaturally flat. The duvet was smooth, stretched taut. The pillows were plump and undisturbed. There was no indentation, no warmth, no trace that anything had ever been there at all. The room was a void. The miraculous reality I had clung to had simply vanished, leaving behind a silence that was now infinitely more horrible than the hospital's beeping dread. The days after the funeral were a study in surreal grief. I wore a black suit and stood by Eleanor, a pillar of stoic support, while inside I was a churning maelstrom of confusion and terror. The condolences felt like they were for a different person, a man who had simply lost his love, not one who had been visited by her and then abandoned a second time. I returned to the house on the cliff. It was no longer a home or a tomb. It was the site of a paranormal event that had broken my understanding of the universe. I slept on the couch, the closed bedroom door a barrier I couldn't cross. But the house itself had changed. The silence developed a texture, a watchful quality. I began to notice anomalies, data points that didn't fit the equation. A faint, unmistakable scent of jasmine would bloom in the living room, then vanish without a trace. I found a single, long auburn hair on my couch pillow, a pillow she had never used. One night, from behind the closed door, I heard it, the soft, rhythmic sound of someone breathing deeply in their sleep. I lay paralyzed until it faded, unsure if it was memory, madness, or something else. The ring. I had to be rid of it. It felt like a radioactive core, the source of this disruption. I drove back to Silas's shop. The old man looked up, his magnified eyes seeming to see right through my grief. "The ring," I said, placing the box on the counter. "I need to return it. She died." He didn't touch it. "The story was written then?" he asked softly. "And yet, you saw her, didn't you?" My head snapped up. "How did you know?" He pushed the box back. "Some stones don't just capture light. They capture love. A promise so strong it can briefly bend the fabric of things. This ring is part of her story now. It belongs to you, and to her." A terrible, thrilling hope warred with my terror. I left with the ring, its weight heavier than ever. That night, driven by a compulsion I didn't understand, I opened the bedroom door. The room was dark, the bed perfectly made. I walked in and placed the open ring box on her pillow. "It's yours," I whispered. "It was always yours." As I turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught my eye. On the wall, faintly visible in the moonlight, was a new painting. One of Alara's, a wild, abstract swirl of deep blues and violets with a single point of white light. A painting that had not been there that morning. She wasn't just a fleeting ghost. She was an artist, and she was still creating. The haunting had a purpose, and I was its sole audience. The new painting was a declaration. The passive, observant phase of the haunting was over. An active, participatory stage was beginning. I developed a new, bizarre routine. I lived my half-life on the couch, and in the evenings, I would sit in the bedroom doorway and talk to the empty room. I told her about my day, about Eleanor, about the world outside. It felt less like madness and more like a conversation with a silent partner. The air in the doorway was often cold, a pocket of frigid emptiness that I interpreted as her listening. Then, the first physical manifestation occurred. I was washing a coffee mug at the kitchen sink, watching a storm gather over the ocean. A sudden, sharp pain lanced across the back of my right hand. I gasped, pulling it back. For parallel, crimson scratches had welled up, beading with blood. They were shallow but real. I stared, confused, then horrified. I remembered. A few days before the accident, Alara had scraped her hand on a thorny rose bush on the deck. For identical scratches. I had kissed them better. This wasn't a memory. It was a transfer. A wound from her past, imprinted onto my present. I stumbled to the bedroom doorway, clutching my hand. "Alara? What was that? Why?" The air in the room grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of frustration. The painting on the wall seemed to churn more violently. She wasn't just reminiscing, she was reliving, and I was being forced to experience it with her. The haunting was no longer about presence, it was about shared sensation, and the sensations were becoming painful. The theory was tested the night the storm broke. The power died, plunging the glass house into darkness, save for the frequent lightning flashes. I was huddled on the couch, the scratches on my hand throbbing in time with my heartbeat. In a flash of lightning, I saw the bedroom door was open. It had been closed. In the subsequent darkness, a new sound rose above the storm's roar. A soft, rhythmic scritch, Scritch, scritch. The sound of a fingernail on wood, another lightning flash. The doorway was empty. Then a deep, resonant thud from the bedroom, like a body hitting the floor. Terror propelled me forward. I grabbed a flashlight and approached, my beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. I shone it into the room. The scene was one of chaos. The duvet was on the floor, pillows scattered. The ring box lay open on the mattress. Empty. My beam swept to the corner and caught her. It was the hospital Alara. A flickering, translucent image hunched over, her form mottled with bruises. She was staring at her clawed, trembling hand, scratching it against the floor. Scritch, scritch, scritch. She looked up, and her eyes, full of pain and terror, met mine. In that instant, a crushing, phantom weight slammed onto my chest. I couldn't breathe. The sound of the ventilator hissed in my ears, not from the room, but from inside my skull. I was feeling her death throes. The flashlight wavered. In the next lightning flash, the corner was empty. The pressure vanished. I gasped for air. Groping in the dark, I stumbled to the bed and fell to my knees, my hands patting the sheets frantically. My fingers closed around something cold and metallic, the ring. I was clutching it in my hand. I had no memory of picking it up. I sat back on my heels, the storm raging outside, the ring a cold, hard truth in my palm. The love I felt was now a cage, and she was pulling me into the darkest moment of her life, forcing me to share a trauma that was not mine to bear. The morning after the storm, a grim clarity settled over me. This was not a random haunting. It was a targeted replay, a spirit stuck in a loop of its own trauma, and I was the designated witness. The house felt different, not just haunted, but infected. The silence that followed the storm was heavier, charged with a residue of pain. I avoided the bedroom for 2 days, the memory of the phantom ventilator hiss still echoing in my mind. But the house itself began to reflect the internal chaos. I would walk into the kitchen to find all the cabinet doors hanging open. The books on the living room shelf were rearranged, not by title, but by color, a task Alara had always threatened to do. A cold spot would drift through the rooms like a slow-moving ghost, and wherever it paused, I would feel a wave of dizzying disorientation, an echo of her confusion in the ICU. The scratches on my hand healed, leaving faint pink lines, a permanent reminder of our psychic connection. I started wearing the ring on a chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt. It felt like a containment unit, a way to keep its disruptive energy close but controlled. Silas had said it was part of her story. Now it was becoming part of mine. The calls from work became more insistent. My boss, concerned, finally said, "Donovan, life has to go on. The world doesn't stop." But my world had stopped. It had stopped and then started again in a twisted, horrific parody of itself. How could I explain that I was now an engineer of the impossible, studying the structural integrity of a haunting? I tried to leave the house once, to go to the grocery store. I got as far as the car when a wave of such profound, irrational panic washed over me that I turned back, my heart hammering. It wasn't my panic. It was the feeling of being left alone, abandoned. It was her fear. I was a prisoner, not of the house, but of her need. The haunting was no longer confined to a single room. Its boundaries were the limits of my own presence. Driven by desperation and a need for any kind of answer, I began to research. I spent days online, falling down rabbit holes of paranormal theory and grief-induced phenomena. I learned about crisis apparitions, spirits that appear to loved ones at the moment of death or shortly after to bring comfort or say goodbye. But this was different. This was protracted. Painful. I found accounts of traumatic echoes, spirits bound to earth by the violence of their passing, forced to relive their final moments. The scratches, the chest pressure, the sound of scratching, it all fit. She was trapped in the feedback loop of her death, and my intense grief, combined with the symbolic power of the ring, had tethered her here, giving her a channel through which to broadcast her agony. One night, sitting in the doorway, I spoke to the empty room with a new understanding. "You're stuck, aren't you?" I said, my voice soft. "You're in the accident, in the hospital. You can't move on." The air in the room grew icy. The cold spot had settled directly in front of me. It was an affirmation. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, genuine sorrow overwhelming my fear. "I'm so sorry you're going through that. But you have to let go. You have to move on. I can't. I can't live in your death with you." For the first time, I felt a new emotion emanating from the room. It wasn't frustration or pain. It was sadness. A deep, bottomless, lonely sadness that made my own eyes fill with tears. Then, a clear, distinct thought that was not my own formed in my mind, as if whispered on the frozen air. "It's dark here. Don't leave me alone." She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was terrified. And in death, as in life, she was turning to me. The following evening, I did something I hadn't done since her return. I made 2 plates of pasta, her favorite, and carried them to the bedroom. I placed one on the floor in the doorway and, after a steadying breath, carried the other into the room itself. I sat on the floor with my back against the foot of the bed, the place where I used to sit and watch her read. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm not leaving you, but you have to show me how to help you." I ate my food in the silent, cold room. When I was done, I looked at the other plate. I hadn't heard a thing, but the pasta was gone. In its place, arranged neatly beside the empty plate, were 4 long-stemmed jasmine flowers, their scent overpowering. They were not from any plant in our garden. It was an offering, a communication. The horror was evolving, becoming a dialogue. She had accepted my invitation. The jasmine flowers wilted after a day, but their scent lingered, a sweet counterpoint to the pervasive chill. Our coexistence entered a new, fragile phase. The violent replays ceased. The scratching, the phantom pressures, the chaotic rearranging of the house, it all stopped. The haunting became quiet, almost domestic. I moved back into the bedroom. I slept on my side of the bed. Her side remained pristine and undisturbed, the ring box still on the pillow. We fell into a routine. I would talk, and the cold spot would shift in response, a silent cursor in our conversation. I felt her presence constantly, a watchful, melancholic companion. I stopped trying to leave the house. The outside world felt distant and unreal. This, the shared space with her echo, was my reality now. One evening, as I was describing a new bridge design, the cold spot settled over the ring box on her pillow. A clear, compelling thought entered my mind, not as a whisper, but as a sure and certain knowledge. "Put it on." A shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down my spine. "Put it on?" I asked aloud. "The ring." A feeling of affirmation, warm and urgent, washed over me. With trembling fingers, I took the ring from the box. It was ice cold. I held it for a moment, then slowly slipped it onto the ring finger of my left hand. It was a perfect fit. The second the metal touched my skin, the room changed. The walls seemed to breathe. The abstract painting on the wall glowed, the swirls of color beginning to move, to flow like liquid. The air grew warm, and the scent of jasmine became so intense it was almost dizzying. And then she was there, Not a flickering hospital phantom, not a silent cold spot. She was the Alara from the doorstep, solid and radiant, sitting cross-legged on her side of the bed. She was smiling, but her eyes were full of a profound, ancient sorrow. "Thank you," her voice sounded in my mind, clear as crystal. "For the promise. For staying. For listening." "Alara," I breathed, tears streaming down my face. "I love you. I love you, Donovan. But you were right. I have to go. The light is here now. It's time." She held out her hand, not for me to take, but in a gesture of farewell. The light in the room intensified, emanating from her. The moving painting on the wall swirled into a brilliant, beautiful vortex of light behind her. "Let me go." It was both a request and a command. And I knew, with a certainty that dwarfed all my engineering knowledge, that if I didn't, this beautiful, terrible purgatory would be our forever. My love had called her back. Now my love had to set her free. "I let you go," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Be at peace, my love." Her smile was the last thing I saw before the light became everything, blinding and warm. It filled the room, filled me, and for a single, eternal second, there was no grief, no pain, no separation. There was only love. Then it was over. The room was dark, lit only by the moon. The painting on the wall was gone. The air was still and scentless. The bed was flat. And I was alone. I looked down at my hand. The ring was still on my finger, but the fire within the stone was gone. It was just a clear, cold piece of carbon. It had served its purpose. The story was written, and it had ended not with a scream, but with a release. The haunting was over. The grief remained, a vast and lonely ocean before me. But for the first time since the accident, it was just my grief. And that was a burden I knew how to carry. I was an engineer of broken things, and now I could finally begin the long, slow work of rebuilding.